Welcome back to From the Mind of Christine McConnell. So now we're going to do the fun part, decorating this cake. I'm going to do something called the Lambeth method, which if you Google that, it's just like an over-the-top version of cake decorating. And I'm going to be adding my own Gothic twist. So it should be really fun. So let's get started. My very first step is going to be to cut out a few stencils that I'm going to be pinning to my cake and sort of outlining with a toothpick. This is a really great sort of technique to kind of get a pattern down, and then it just makes going in with the frosting that much easier. I then use a clear ruler to mark the opposite ends using just a toothpick to indent the spots that I know I want to keep in mind, and then that way I can use those as a guide when I place my stencils on the cake. An incredible patron sent me these beautiful little skull push pins, and I love them so much. So each of these, you just go around and you outline the stencil with a toothpick, and this is the perfect way to not, damage the cake too much, but you also know exactly where you're going when it's time to decorate. And you can always make mistakes, like I did right here, where I just made a shape that was too wide and then ultimately decided a design that was a little more narrow was more flattering. So now I've got a fresh batch of buttercream ready to be tinted with these gel-based food colorings. I always like to use a little bit of black because it tends to tone down or mute the vibrancy of these shades, and it just kind of gives your cake a little bit of elegant restraint. You really don't need a lot, and a little bit of this color can go very far. So I always add just a tiny little bit, mix it together, see if I like it, and then add little bits more until I reach a shade that I'm super happy with. I'm now using a sculpting tool to chisel out the frosting in the stenciled areas that we marked, and I'll be filling these voids with the tinted buttercream that we just made. Now comes the really fun part of filling a pastry bag with this tinted buttercream, and I will be piping essentially kind of mounds into these sort of silhouette shapes and then using a variety of sculpting tools to smooth them out. This process is going to look like it goes really fast, but the truth is it took forever, just hours. One of the reasons for that is you can only work on the cake for, I want to say maybe 10 minutes, and then it needs to go back into the refrigerator for about 15 minutes. So it's a tedious project, but it's really beautiful and fun in the end. So once you've got it pretty close to how you want it, but you want that finished coat to look as smooth as possible, you cannot beat the heat from your thumb. But because we obviously don't want to smear the oils from our fingertips into this cake, I'm using a piece of parchment to sort of create a barrier, and you just slide it along and it looks beautiful when it's finished. Now what we're going to be doing is making aquafaba from these chickpeas. We're going to strain these out, set those chickpeas aside. You can make a delicious hummus with those later. And we're going to be reducing the water content by about 1/3. So you just simmer this on medium heat and then chill in the refrigerator before using. And here's that finished hummus. It was incredibly delicious. Once your aquafaba has chilled down to a little bit cooler than room temperature, add 6 tablespoons to your mixer. 2 tablespoons is the equivalent of 1 egg white. And if you want to know more about aquafaba, Food 52 is a YouTube channel that has an incredible instructional video. We're going to whisk this up until it becomes nice and foamy. Add a little less than 1/8 teaspoon of cream of tartar. About 1/8 teaspoon of almond flavoring to enhance the taste of this icing. 1 teaspoon vanilla. You're then going to be adding 4 cups of confectioner sugar. You're going to want to add 1 cup at a time, mix it all up, and then add the next one. To brighten it up, I'm adding just a couple drops white food coloring. Now let's talk about the difference between traditional royal icing versus this aquafaba-based royal icing. There is no comparison. This is 1,000 times better. When you work with traditional royal icing in large batches, like I did with the Winchester Mystery House, you get this like eggy smell. There's none of that here. And you also risk salmonella poisoning with traditional eggs. And there's none of that here as well. The garbanzo beans are less expensive than the eggs, and the aquafaba stretches further than traditional egg whites. So there is no comparison. That this does everything that does. There's no risks, it's less expensive, and it lasts longer. So if you take away any of these recipes and start using them, this is the one that I would definitely start using. Now is the part that I personally really love. I draw out all of these kind of elaborate designs on just normal copy paper. Once you have shapes that you really like, you lay some parchment paper down over it, and then you take some of the royal icing in a piping bag with a very small tip, and you sort of trace out these shapes, move the parchment paper along, and then just keep doing that. Then you want these pieces to rest and dry out completely overnight, and then the next day, you can affix these to the cake in a 3-dimensional kind of way, and then it adds this incredibly glamorous touch to the cake. Something to keep in mind is if you're laying down a lot of frosting, the thicker the frosting, the longer it will take to dry. So just keep that in mind. And once it's completely dried out, they're pretty sturdy. The thinner pieces, though, that are very small, are incredibly delicate. To add some strength, I'm going over these with a second layer. I'm so excited to show you what I'm going to do with these. So piping tips are one of the things that I have seen people asking me about. And I didn't even realize until someone here on Patreon pointed out that the piping tips have numbers on them. So an Ateco 261 it's like a tiny little circle. It's the piping tip I use all the time. I use it for little touch-ups, doing all of my string work. I also really, really love little star-tipped piping tips. This is a number 15. I'm going to attach like something about like the tips that I like using to this episode. But basically, circular tips that just have like a little round hole, and then star tips are the ones that I use constantly. And that's why I have so many of them. And they sell a whole bunch of piping tips that look like they do all sorts of bizarre things. And I guess I've seen a few people do cool things with them, but by and large, you can virtually do all you need with what I have here. Now let me show you my very favorite border technique. This is something you want to do with buttercream. Royal icing would not be a great fit for this. And let me break down for you how I do this. So it's a big swirl and a little baby swirl. Opposite direction, big swirl, little baby swirl. Opposite direction, big swirl, little baby swirl. Opposite direction, big swirl, little baby swirl. And if you're feeling really adventurous, you can even add a second layer. This is a hallmark of the Lambeth method, which essentially is just adding multiple layers to add, more adornment and more glamour and drama to your cake. Here I'm using a star-shaped tip to create this pattern. Now I'm using a toothpick to mark the places that I'll be adding embellishments. This is the same star-shaped tip that I used to create those borders, and I'm just making sure each of these ropes ends in a point. Now's the really fun part where we're going to start adding those royal icing adornments that we made last night. And I'm gluing these in with a little bit of royal icing. These cakes are the perfect outlet for people who struggle with overdoing things because you kind of can't overdo these. They're meant to look, glamorous and layered and overdone, and it's really hard to make them look bad by adding more. I feel compelled to add something creepy to everything I do, so I decided to add some spiders in the centers of these frames. I'm using royal icing to create all of the really, really tiny defined accents that I'm adding to this cake, Buttercream is amazing for adding larger flourishes, but if you want to do really, really fine details, the royal icing is ideal. Now I'm just cleaning up the points on those ropes and adding a little bit of royal icing to define them more. I added these pearl accents along the base of the border, and ultimately I ended up not liking them, and in just a moment you'll see me cover them up. Now for the string work. This is my favorite thing to do for some weird reason. To get the right consistency, you're going to want to add more confectioner sugar to your royal icing, and it's just kind of like a game of testing it out, seeing if your rope holds and making sure it's not so stiff that you kill your hand. So it takes a little, finesse to sort of figure out the right consistency, but once you get it, it goes very smoothly. If you do find that you've added too much confectioner sugar, you can very easily correct this by just adding a few drops of aquafaba back into it. I create the base of my strings by piping just a little bit of a chunk and then forcing out as much of the icing as I possibly can, trying to avoid any thin spots in the rope. Oops, it looks like I've sprung a leak on this bag. Now we're just defining these spiders by adding a slightly more watered down consistency of the royal icing that's going to sort of mold around the initial shape that I made and add a bit of a gloss. Something to know about string work is it is incredibly beautiful, it looks lovely, and it is temporary. So if you are doing a cake for an event or you're transporting a cake somewhere, it's best to do this type of string work shortly before the cake is going to be displayed. So if you're taking a cake somewhere, take the cake to the location, set it up where you want it, and then do the string work because it's more likely to stay intact that way. Even if you leave it overnight sometimes in your refrigerator, certain parts of it will start to chip away. All right, it's all finished. I'm so excited to be able to bake again, just because it's something I've really missed. You get to make these incredible sort of pieces of art, and then you get to completely destroy them. Normally, you know, you have like a gathering or something for this, but you guys are watching it, so I think it's time to cut into this and see how it tastes. So say goodbye, pretty little thing. All right, let's taste this and see how it is. Watch it be terrible. It's so delicious. Oh my God. It's incredible. Okay. Well, this was a massive success. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I hope you try these recipes because they're incredible. And I will look forward to seeing you. This turned into such a monster project. I thought this was going to be a little quick project, and they never work out that way. So take care of yourselves. We're going to be doing a movie night this month, so look out for that. And I will see you again very soon.